So in terms of how I feel, I would say a little apprehensive going in. I've already been in a couple of times this week just to sort of check things out and just make sure that the faculty I work for, everything's running relatively smoothly. I suppose the big test will be what it will be like once we have students in. The first week is going to first week with students in will be next week, and it's going to be staggered. So it's going to be like half a generation in for half a day, and so on and so on and so on. And so that's probably going to be the most interesting time, I think. I think it's great that we've been given a week to sort of just acclimatize and be together as teachers so that we feel comfortable in school. Because I think if we were all thrown in at the same time after, and bearing in mind as well, this isn't just like a lockdown like in the UK. We've not been teaching in school since March of 2020. We went into lockdown a week earlier than the UK did. So we actually 2 weeks earlier, we closed schools, or did online learning or started online learning 2 weeks before the UK. And so we've not left that until now. So it's going to be a real big adjustment for teachers. I've got a very comfortable setup teaching online. I'm very, very comfortable with it now. And actually being inside of school is kind of how I'm feeling the same as I did when I knew that I would be switching to online learning. There's that less of an uncertainty because I've done it before, but I feel like I've had nearly a year and a half now of being very familiar with systems that work, and I've developed habits that have helped me be more effective as a classroom teacher online. But it's stuff that's just not going to work it's just stuff that's totally not going to work in school. So for me, the thing that I'm feeling most apprehensive about is, am I still going to be able to teach like I normally was able to teach? Am I going to be able to manage a class? Am I going to be able to manage practical activities? And then on top of that, am I going to be able to make sure that all the students are safe at the same time? So I suppose that's how I'm feeling right now about the situation. And that kind of leads me on to like the themes and the goals for the rest of this academic year, which is what we're going to be talking about today on the show. Please do text in with any questions or comments. We're going to be talking about themes and goals for the rest of the academic year, but also beyond the academic year. What personal goals do you have? What goals do your schools have? Do you regularly set goals? And we're just going to start by talking about basically what I do in terms of how I manage and track my own goals. So I'm a big fan of productivity and workflow. I'm a bit of a geek when it comes to that. So one of the things that I find really, really important is I need to track my progress and my goals over a certain period of time. And I kind of have short-term goals, middle-term goals, and long-term goals. And really that kind of got all flown out of proportion or flown out of the window because of COVID. And so my plans for last year were basically had to adapt and change very, very quickly. And so what I do is each year, and normally what I will do is I'll do this at the beginning of an academic year, but at the beginning of an academic year, I'll have a theme for that year. And the theme is very, very loose and very, very open-ended, but it's a theme that I can kind of track my progress about. And if I have any projects, I kind of try and link it into that theme. And so I would normally do this at the beginning of an academic year, but I'm going to start doing it a little bit earlier this year because I feel like it was starting afresh anyway, coming back into a new school. So what do I mean by themes? Well, I actually stole the idea from a YouTuber called CGP Grey. I'm sure a lot of people have already heard of him. He's a really, really famous YouTuber. He was actually a physics teacher. He trained as a physics teacher and did his PGCE, I think, about a year before I did my PGCE. So he was probably teaching physics about the same time I was teaching physics. And then he left teaching physics in the UK to pursue a career as a YouTuber. He got really big making educational videos. He makes really, really really well explained educational videos. But he's also really, really keen on productivity. And the first video I saw of him was probably his least famous video. And it's called Time Management Tips for Teachers. And a lot of this stuff to me now is really obvious and really makes a lot of sense. It was kind of like, why wasn't I doing this before? But he came up with a video basically just explaining how to maximize your time so you're not taking as much work home as you possibly could. He made this about 11 years ago, so it's 10, 11 years ago, so it's probably a little bit out of date. But that led me to discover the rest of his YouTube videos at the time. So most of the time he spends making videos explaining just random things like the difference between Great Britain, the UK, England, all of these kind of like explainer videos. But every now and then he'll make a video on productivity and workflow. And he also hosts a podcast about productivity and workflow. And he came up with this idea of New Year's resolutions are really, really bad, because you basically every year you set some targets for yourself, you set some resolutions. They're normally completely unattainable, or they're so failable that you will lose interest within 2 weeks. So, so he came up with the idea of, instead of saying, okay, for a New Year's resolution, instead of saying, I'm going to exercise every day, or I'm going to go on a diet, or I'm going to run every day, or something like that, why don't you base that year on a theme instead of on a resolution? So if it was all about, I'm going to lose weight, or I'm going to lose X number of stone by this date, or I'm going to run X number of kilometers by this date, why don't you instead say this year the theme is going to be the year of health? And so it's in the back of your mind all of the time. And then you're saying like, okay, well, part of my theme this year is health. So that means that maybe you start trying running for the first month or so, and it turns out that you absolutely hate running and really, really don't want to do it. Well, if you set a resolution to yourself of saying, right, I'm going to run every day for this year, or twice a week for this year, and it turns out that after a month of doing this, you hate it, you're either going to stop doing it, or you're going to continue doing something that you don't really like, really enjoy, and you're probably not going to be successful with it. But if you make the theme, the theme this year is the year of health, maybe you do run for a couple of weeks, you try and stick at it, you realize you don't like it, but then you find that swimming is more enjoyable for you, or cycling, or whatever. You're still staying healthy and you're still keeping with the theme, but it's something that's more flexible and more attainable. So I've started using this idea of not having resolutions at the start of a new academic year, but having themes for me at the start of a new academic year. This year, I have to be honest that I didn't have a theme, and that was because I knew I was still in the middle of the pandemic. And so my theme originally for last academic year was the year of growth. The year of growth and the year of improvement was my theme. And so I'd just been promoted. So this was a year and a half or nearly 2 years ago now. I'd just been promoted into my role as a head of faculty, and so I wanted to grow in that position. But I also wanted to grow personally. So I wanted to grow in terms of developing some skills and developing some hobbies, and in just improving my life in general. So my theme was going to be the year of growth. Obviously, 6 months into that theme, COVID hit quite hard everywhere. And so I had to readjust my theme. My theme then became the year of adaptability. And so my theme for the past, it's been for about 14 months, has been being good, being able to adapt to a situation. And so any kind of goals and targets I set have to relate around this theme. And what I do is I kind of check and monitor my theme by journaling. And so I basically buy a really cheap notebook and I write, this is my theme for the year. And each day before I start work, what I'll do is I'll just write in my journal, what are my goals for the day? What are things I absolutely have to do today? What is one thing that I want to have done that kind of links to my theme that I could try and achieve? And then I can monitor my progress. But I also do other things as well about how am I feeling today? What is my overall mood? And then I can look back on it and monitor it and track it. And I find that kind of really helps sort of set my goals and set my themes. So we're talking about themes, and we're talking about goals for teachers, both personally, but also professionally on Teachers Talk Radio. I would love to hear from you. Please, please, please do text in. It really, really makes a difference if you text in. We can have a discussion. What are your themes for this year? What are you looking forward to for the rest of the half term? What are you not looking forward to for the rest of the half term? What kind of targets are you going to be setting yourself either personally or professionally for the rest of the academic year until July? But also, what kind of things are you looking ahead to? What kind of goals do you have looking ahead for the next academic year as well? Please please do text in. We're really looking forward to hearing from you and discussing with you. Also, if you wish to call in, we're taking call-ins as well. Be great to hear from you as well to discuss anything that we're talking about. So we're talking about overall goals and themes on Teachers Talk Radio. We talked about how I kind of log and track my goals, and this is kind of like the big picture wishy-washy stuff. I kind of like have an overall theme for the year. I haven't decided what my theme's going to be for next academic year. I suppose like year of openness or year of novelty could be kind of a good thing, because I think this year we have spending 14 months in my office at home teaching students has been really, really dull. So I'm trying to think of a theme that could kind of come along the lines of the theme of not being not being dumb, theme of not dullness. But I'm trying to find a way of wording that properly. Seb has just messaged in and saying the term developing middle this term developing middle leaders to coach and help with QA ready for September. Absolutely. So as a middle leader of myself, this is something that I really want to take up on. I think it's something that's quite easily overlooked by schools as well, especially in international schools. I'm not that this is not a direct comment on my current school that I am in, but I think as a middle leader, it's very easy to kind of get overlooked. You are kind of bogged down in the minutiae of running a faculty, running a year team, or like a pastoral team or something along those lines. And there's a lot of work that is kind of brought down to you from senior management, and then you have to kind of facilitate that within your team, and you have very little opportunity to actually develop yourself in that time. And I think one of the goals for me this year is going to be taking on more training myself, trying to get the school to pay for it, of course, but also just taking on any extra CPD roles and courses along those lines. So I'm going to pause very briefly to sort of shout out to a couple of groups that have really, really helped me in the year of adaptability, which is my theme for this year. The first one is Chat Physics, which is a Twitter community of physics teachers, but they also run Chat Biology and Chat Biology and Chat Chemistry. And it is if you are a science teacher, an aspiring science teacher, a science technician in the school, in a secondary school, we also welcome primary school teachers as well, of course. If you are interested in teaching science, please get involved with either Chat Physics, Chat Chemistry, or Chat Biology. I found myself at the start of the lockdown being really isolated. Obviously, I still had my colleagues, but we weren't able to chat and share ideas as much as we were able to in school. I found that some of the most interesting ideas that I've had in my career have come from either informal chats or just sort of like passing in the hallway kind of conversations with people about what's happening, and like you can just be sat in the staff lounge and saying, oh, I'm really struggling to teach this, and someone else will pipe in and go, oh, have you tried this, and things like that. This year we've really lost everyone that I've worked with has really lost the opportunity to try and share those ideas. Yes, we have meetings over Zoom, but it's not the same, especially even if there's only like 5 or 6 people on the call in Zoom. I find it personally really difficult to want to start a conversation with people, because everyone's going to hear that conversation. Whereas if you had 5 or 6 people in a room, you might have 2 people chatting off to the side. There's just a layer of artificiality that's really difficult to get past. And so for me, I had to kind of find my own kind of communities to help kind of share ideas and bounce ideas off. And one of those things was Chat Physics. So if you're a science teacher, primarily a physics teacher, but they also have 2 wonderful accounts for chemistry and biology, check them out on Twitter. They're a really supportive group. I really got into Twitter because of them. I had a Twitter account for a while, but never really paid much attention to it. And over the year, I've really gotten into edgy Twitter and Chat Physics and the chat sciences as a whole. And it's a really supportive community. I think a lot of people badmouth Twitter and say it's a burning dumpster fire. And I think that is probably true for a lot of things, for a lot of places there, but I haven't experienced it. So I'm really lucky to experience one of the really nice, positive, friendly places of Twitter. Yes, people disagree every now and then, but it's not everyone is angry all the time, which is wonderful to hear. Also, please do follow us on Twitter as well. If you are here on Teachers Talk Radio, you can follow us on there as well. And if you want to tweet at us, please also use the hashtag TTRadio, and we'll be discussing things there. So we're talking about themes and developments for this year. Seb's also just messaged in to say middle leader's hardest job in school, in my opinion. As a middle leader myself, I'm going to argue, yes, that is totally the case. But I'm sure classroom teachers will say, no, that's the hardest one. And I'm sure senior leaders or heads of year or heads of key stage or whatever you want to call it are also going to say the same thing as well. I think for me, the hardest thing about being a middle leader is you're kind of in the middle. You can't, it can be quite an isolated role, because you have to act as a buffer between management and your team. and you have to make sure you fight and protect your team. And it sounds like, senior management are gunning for your team, and I don't mean that at all. But I think you have to fight your case for senior management, to senior management, about what's going to work for your team, and protect them for want of a better word. Protect them for want of a better word. But you also have to make sure that you're consistent with your approach, and that you are essentially singing from the same hymn sheet as senior management. So you need to make sure that you're kind of towing a line. And I found that incredibly difficult to make sure, because there's sometimes where, sometimes I'm like, oh, things aren't going well and I want to have a moan, but I need to be positive about it all the time. So that's something that I also found incredibly difficult this year, because normally you would have other middle leaders to talk to, discuss with, bounce ideas off, have a chat with, and it's very hard to do that naturally over Zoom. So that's sort of an area that I've kind of struggled with this year, and I'm very looking forward to being back in school and being with all of my colleagues to be able to sort of share and bounce ideas off. So we're talking about goals and themes for the rest of the academic year. What are your personal goals? What are your personal goals, professional goals for this academic year? My goal, to be honest, my very short-term goal is we've got another 5 weeks of school, most likely. We finish early July. We finish a couple of weeks before the UK. So we have about 5 weeks of school left. And there's no great time to reopen school after such a short period of time, but I would say that right now it's fairly low stakes in terms of opening school. The main priority is making sure that the children coming into school, the students coming into school, feel safe, reacclimatize with the concept of being in school, as opposed to learning on Zoom for a year and 3 months now. That's going to be the main priority. We're also very fortunate that tags have finished for us, thankfully. I'm sure we will get an email from an exam board, and it means that I'll have to do something last minute, because exam boards seem to have been caught completely off guard a year and a half into a global pandemic. Who knew? So I'm sure that we'll have to probably do some last minute things for the exam boards that we work with, but all of that has kind of been finished now. There's only a few little bits and pieces. So we've kind of got through tags and predicted grades and all of the school assessed grades that we have to do. So right now we don't have year 11 have left, but they're doing sort of like a pre-sixth form course. And then year 13 have left as well. So it means that we're very, very low stakes at the moment. The exam groups have finished. So the priority for us, and my goal for this rest of this term, is going to be ensuring that the mental health of students and their mental well-being, and that their comfort in school, they're reacclimatized to being in school. We're going to do that in a number of ways. We're going to first have just sort of a week of pastoral activities, no academic activities, but just sort of a week of get to know you exercises, fun activities for the kids to feel safe and happy in school. And then we're going to go to a hybrid model in the next couple of weeks, where we will rotate who is coming in. And during that time, for me as a science teacher, the priority is going to be making sure they feel happy and safe, but also making sure that they have great opportunity to do loads of fun experiments, loads of good practicals, because other than a few online practicals and some ones that we've been kind of able to do at home, it's been really, really tricky for our students to do any practical work. So first goal for this year is getting the students happy and feeling healthy inside of school. And then the next goal is trying to catch them up as best we can on any kind of comment or any kind of project work, practical work that they have missed. But I would love to hear from you. What are your goals for this academic year, for the rest of this academic year? What are your goals for next year? Has the pandemic helped you in a way to improve your teaching? Have you had to learn new skills and you want to continue using those new skills or developing those skills because of distance learning, because of online learning? We are going to pause here for a second to play the news, and then we will be back. Please do text in with what are your goals, what are you going to do, what are your goals for the rest of this academic year? You're listening to The Late Late Show with me, Rich Wrigley, and it's time for the news.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News with Megan Goods.
This is your latest Teachers Talk radio news. Recruitment levels for trainee teachers were missed for the 6th year running in the 2019-20 academic year. Following the last year, however, they are expected to increase, with the Welsh Government believing the pandemic has highlighted the importance of the profession. A government spokesman said, "Current trends suggest the pandemic has helped to highlight the vital role played by teachers, and more people are choosing to start teacher training." Senior Policy Officer for the NEU, Mary van den Hovel, also said she believes lockdown has helped the image of the profession, but that it was too early to know the exact impact. In 2019 in Wales, only 465 secondary trainees enlisted of an allocated 1,006 spaces. The Labour Party has called the government's £1.4 billion catch-up plan inadequate. The Shadow Education Secretary, Kate Green, said she was shocked at how little the plan contained, describing it as a betrayal of our young people, and stated that Kevin Collins's resignation makes it clear that the government's education recovery plan is totally insufficient to help every child bounce back from the impacts of the pandemic. The Labour Party is seeking a U-turn on the policy, testing government backbenchers with an opposition day debate this Wednesday in the House of Commons. Gavin Williamson has urged families to ensure they complete COVID tests before returning to school following the May half-term holiday. More than 50 million lateral flow tests have been taken by students across England since January. Williamson said he was hugely grateful to the families, students, and all those working in education for their role in making it happen. Despite the continued testing regimes, concern is still mounting in schools surrounding the Delta variant, which is thought to have a 40% higher transmission rates than other COVID variants. That was your daily education news briefing.
And that was the news. So you're welcome if you've just joined us. We're listening to the Late Late Show with me, Rich Wrigley, this evening. We're talking about goals and themes and target setting for the rest of the academic year, but also for the year beyond as well. That could be personal themes or personal targets, personal goals, as well as academic targets or professional targets as well. One of the personal targets that I'm going to be setting myself this year is I used to run a heck of a lot, and I still kind of do it a little bit, but I basically run during my lunch break around my house, which sounds about as exciting as it is. And I used to really, really love running marathons, running half marathons, running 10Ks, competitively. Well, not competitively, but on races. To say that to call me running competitive, my running competitive would be very, very generous at best. So anyway, with things opening up here in Mexico City, one of the goals that I have this year is to, well, by this time next year, we'll have run a personal best in a marathon. So I'm going to try and train as best I can for that. But I'd also like to try and run a couple of half marathons and get some personal bests in that as well as some trail races as well. So we're talking about our personal. We are talking about. Sorry, just got distracted there. That was a very Alan Partridge moment for me right there. So. We are talking about our goals for this year. What are your personal goals for the rest of the academic year? What are your personal goals beyond the academic year? Personally, I think for me, my first goal is very, very short term. It's only just going to take a couple of weeks, and that's just going to be getting back into school and feeling safe and happy, or as happy as I can be, teaching in the middle of a pandemic. The next goal for me after that is going to be improving my use of technology in the classroom. So we've just been given a load of new kind of equipment, interactive whiteboards. I still don't know how I feel about interactive whiteboards personally. I think they're just a very fancy way of doing the same thing that you could do with other less high-tech pieces of technology. But I do think that one of my goals this year is not just knowing how to use that technology, but how to actually successfully implement it in my classroom. I'm a big fan of practical-based learning in science and getting students to use practical equipment, and I feel very, very confident doing that in my lessons. But then when it comes to using technology, I wouldn't say I'm afraid of it. I'm a physics teacher, so technology and the internet is my friend. When people told me I was going to go into lockdown, I was like, cool, so you mean I don't have to interact with my colleagues? I can just talk to them over video chat? Sounds great to me. But it's something that I want to improve so it's more seamless and less kind of forced in the classroom. What are your personal goals, what are your personal goals, professional goals for the rest of the academic year and beyond? Please do text in. I love to hear from you. It's great to always have a discussion, have a chat about what's happening. Please do text in on Teachers Talk Radio. We're also streaming live at the moment on Twitter and on YouTube, so you can listen to us there on Twitter and on YouTube. Please do text in there as well, or tweet in, and we can discuss our personal goals together for the rest of the academic year. So what are your personal goals? Please do text in. So another thing that I do as well in terms of organizing my goals is I'll have a theme, and we've talked about, I basically have a theme journal for the year where I'll kind of like keep up to date with it each one day a year, each day of the year as I'm going along. But I have some sort of more concrete middle term goals for the rest of the year. And one of the things that I found really useful was I used to find that I would just set a goal and I would never have a completion date to do the goal. I would never have any signs of how to actually know that I've done the goal effectively. I would just be like, yep, I want to do this. I want to improve my differentiation, a classic cliched argument, something along those lines. Well, what I would do in terms of monitoring my goals is I found using calendars is a great way of improving and making sure I set reminders. So one thing I'll do is I'll set a 3-monthly goal, a 3-monthly review, while I'll have middle term goals as a document, and I'll just set a bunch of goals for the 3 months. They can be personal, things like exercise and improving things along that way, but they can also be professional, and they try and stick to the theme that I have for that academic year. So for example, this year has been the theme of adaptability, and so one of the short-term goals I set myself for the first 3 months was to learn how to effectively use Google Classroom and Google Zoom and become a Google certified educator. These were things that I knew roughly how to do, but there was never any prescient need at the start of the pandemic to be really, really comfortable using Google Classroom. There was just no need whatsoever. But I soon quickly found out that I needed to make sure that I was able to be really effective, not just in knowing how Google Classroom worked, but knowing how to set up activities and classroom assignments and things like that that were meaningful to my students to actually help improve their learning. So one of the goals I set out, was just to make sure that I could effectively become a Google teacher, essentially. And so one of the things I did was set myself a 3-monthly goal of saying, right, okay, by the end of 3 months, I want to have a level 2 certification in Google Classroom, in Google Apps for Education, like the Google Certified Teacher, as well as used different ways of using Google Classroom. And then a longer term goal is to build a website for all of my teaching resources. What I would then do is set a free monthly reminder. I have it basically pop up a week before the 3 months is up as an email notification. And then it will just remind me, okay, right, today we're going to be checking our free monthly review. And this is just something I check with myself, no other colleagues or anything like that. And it's just stuff that's like personal in that respect. And then I can see if I don't meet the goals, I can see, right, okay, well, what was I doing? Was I just setting ridiculous goals that were just too optimistic? Or was I setting goals that could just be, just not attainable? Or was I not monitoring them properly? But having that 3-month period or that 3-month cycle to check short-term goals has been really, really beneficial for me. I've started actually doing it several years ago, and it's something that I've just really made sure that I'm being on top of during this time, during this situation with COVID and everything like that. With going back into school, my next goal as well is to, as a head of faculty, is to improve the faculty. My original goal when I was appointed as a head of science head of science, was to renovate a lot of the practical facilities we had in the classrooms, improving certain areas on that, even things like making sure technicians were trained up on certain areas. And I was appointed as head of faculty, and then within 3 months, COVID hit. So I was kind of in the middle of all of this, and then basically went, right, can't do that. Originally I thought, right, okay, cool, this is going to be a problem where we're off school for 2 weeks, it's going to suck. That's a pain. And then the situation got worse, and we're like, okay, well, maybe it's like a month and a bit, maybe it's like 6 weeks. And then basically towards the end of the academic year last year, around July of last year, I was like, maybe we'll be in school in September. And then it got worse. And then I was like, well, maybe we'll be in after the half term in October. And that didn't happen. I was like, well, maybe we'll be in December. And then, no, that wasn't going to happen. Well, maybe we'll be in towards the end of the academic year, which is pretty much where we are right now. So I've not really been able to do any kind of long-term planning other than any kind of middle-term planning, I should say. We've been able to do long-term planning for like what we want to do when we're back in, what we want to do in a year's time, in 3 years' time, and so on. But really, everyone's day-to-day sort of life at the moment has kind of been on survival mode, for want of a better word, trying to just make sure that we can do as best as we can for the students, to make sure that the students are learning to the best of their ability, and then everything else would be a bonus. But now we're kind of coming out of that, and it's a bit of a shock for me personally. I feel like teaching from home has been my new normal for a year and a half now, and it does feel very weird to be thinking, right, okay, we're going to be in a classroom in 2 weeks with X number of students. What have we got to do to make sure everyone's okay? It's happened very, very quickly because schools have opened up very, very quickly after the vaccination program had finished for all educational staff. Originally, I think most teachers imagined that we would be in school in August of this coming academic year. We thought, yep, they'll vaccinate us quickly and then that will be it. But it's kind of turned out to be the opposite. The vaccine program has been rolled out pretty effectively here, and we're just slowly the vaccine program has been rolled out much more efficiently than anyone had expected. I think about a quarter of the population now has been vaccinated, bearing in mind that the population of Mexico is around 120 million. That means at least 30 million vaccines have been applied. So it is a huge logistical challenge to facilitate. It means that we're kind of being caught out because we all thought, yep, we'll be in August 2021. That's going to be our plan. So we've had to kind of readapt our plans relatively quickly. Schools were only announced to be opened up pretty much after all teachers were vaccinated a couple of weeks ago. So it's been very, very quick, the whole program. So right now, our goal is very low stakes, get students back in and make them feel happy and healthy. And really, it's very, very low stakes because this could be a really nice dry run as well for August, when we're going to be starting a new course, starting new courses. It's going to be a lot more pressure on us as well to make sure that our Key Stage 4 exam groups have been caught up. Our Key Stage 5 exam groups have all caught up as well. And so right now it's more just like, right, let's try some things. Let's not take risks in terms of people's safety, but let's see what works. Let's try out some things in terms of how we can lay out a classroom, how we can teach effectively with masks on, how students can learn effectively while wearing masks and being socially distant, what's going to work effectively, what are the procedures going to be for August. Let's try some of those out, or let's try all of those out. What is working, what's not. Let's get rid of the ones that are not working. Let's sort of get rid of those that way as well. So that's pretty much our goals for this year. Very low stakes, make sure students are safe, happy and healthy in school. And the main priority as well is going to be the social aspect for our students. If you think that if they've not been able to socialize with anyone other than maybe their siblings, maybe some close friends in their sort of bubble, and their parents, we're now expecting them to come back into school after effectively a year and 4 months of learning, but of not learning how to socialize. that's going to be our big challenge. And I'm going back to what someone asked me at the beginning of the show: what am I apprehensive about, or what am I worried about, but how do I feel about it? One of my concerns right now is, are students going to be able to socialize? Are they going to be able to go into a classroom and not feel nervous going into a classroom? Because I know, for example, for me, when I go into a shopping mall, even if I'm wearing like 2 masks, I'm keeping my social distance, I feel very, very uncomfortable being in a busier space than is safe. And I know that a lot of our students feel the same as well. We also have to remember that a lot of our students may have had family members who were sick with COVID, or may have been sick themselves with COVID as well. So it's also something that is a huge trauma that all of our students, not just here in Mexico, but all of our students are going through. And I think it's something that we can easily forget when we are thinking about catching up students. I think we also need to make sure that we're catching up students emotionally as well as academically. Here in Mexico, we actually had a similar situation 10 years ago, before I was teaching here. Obviously, the swine flu pandemic meant 10 years ago meant schools were closed, but for a very short period of time. I think for 2 weeks, I think was the record. But also more recently, 4 years ago, in September of 2017, there was a very, very strong earthquake that hit Mexico City. It was very odd, actually, because it happened on the 19th of September. And in 1985, on the 19th of September, there was a very, very strong earthquake that killed many people. And then every year on that day, on the 19th of September, it's law that all businesses, schools, whatever, basically anything that's open with a lot of people, has to run an earthquake drill, and they will run it at 12 noon to make sure it's run at the same time, and you practice evacuating safely and everything like that. Drills are run more often as well in companies, but it's a legal requirement that happens every year, and it's kind of like the national earthquake drill that's done. And that had already just happened in 2017. That had already just happened. The drill had just been taken place at 12 p.m., 12 noon, I should say, sorry. And then a couple of hours later, I think it was only about an hour and a half later, the magnitude 7 earthquake hit. So it's the craziest kind of luck, or the craziest kind of coincidence that it would happen on the day. I suppose the odds are 1 in 365, but it did happen. So people were kind of caught off guard and thought, oh, is it a drill or whatever? And so luckily, buildings here are built very, very well, even though there was a lot of damage and there were some lives lost. It could have been a lot worse, and one of the reasons was because of the safety and drills that were put in place. But this happened during a school day, and so this happened while students were in school. And so all students here in Mexico City, basically, if they were in school on that day, went through, had to live through an earthquake inside of school. And a lot of schools were damaged, or areas were closed, because for a certain amount of time, to make sure that the buildings were safe and things like that. So the schools were closed for a very short-ish period of time compared to this, but then students would go back into school. And pastorally, as a tutor here, as a tutor here, but also as someone who's aware of the pastoral program, one of the things that we have to be aware of, that was when I first arrived here, or when I first started working in my school a couple of years ago, was that students had been in school for a couple of, this had only been about a year and a half since the earthquake had hit. And so there was still some trauma, or still some trauma with kids about the earthquake, and they would feel scared or apprehensive about certain things. As a science teacher, I had to be very careful when I was discussing waves and different types of waves on earthquakes. And when we would talk about earthquakes in Key Stage 3, we would have to make sure that we were discussing it very, very carefully, because it could be a trigger, essentially, for some of the students to feel a little upset and traumatized by it. And I think that going back into school, that's something that we all need to be aware of going back in, that we may have students in our classroom who have either been ill with COVID, or maybe even seriously ill with COVID. We don't know, particularly the older students, but also may have lost family members, or had, other kind of, association, other negative experiences or terrible experiences because of COVID. So I think the most important thing is, yeah, academically, students will catch up. And it does really bother me when we prioritize that over the mental well-being of students. And one of the things I think, one of the most important jobs of a school is not to teach students content. That sounds really, really bad coming from a teacher, but I think the number one job of a school is to teach students how to socialize, how to interact with other human beings, essentially teaching students how to be human, how to human essentially. And they've not had that interaction. Well, my students certainly haven't had it for a year and a half. And students in the UK will probably have had a similar experience as well. Speaking to my family in the UK who have children in schools, it's been very, very difficult in terms of being able to socialize. I'm so thankful that people are able to open up a little bit more in the UK now, especially with the vaccine rollout. It sounds like, speaking to my family members in the UK, it sounds like my family members who are in school, who've been able to see their friends a lot more, being able to socialize with people, being able to have a relatively normal childhood. And I think that's something that we are going to, how to make students, sorry, I completely brain freeze there. Sorry, folks. So sorry. Problem is when people text in, I love it when people text in, but I see a little text pop up and I'm in the middle of my train of thought. And I'm a very, very inelegant physicist. I can think about one thing at a time. To quote Trailer Park Boys, I seem to be quoting Trailer Park Boys, but my spirit animal is Ricky from Trailer Park Boys, who is no, don't worry. Someone just texted in and then just texted in, sorry, no worries about it. But my spirit animal is Ricky from Trailer Park Boys. And there was a moment where they talk about how Ricky thinks, and he goes, Ricky can handle one thought at a time. If you throw 2 or 3 thoughts at Ricky, he's going to train wreck. And that's very much how I can do it. So I can talk for ages and talk about X, Y, and Z, but then I see something pop up in the chat and I can see people texting in already. Please do text in. Please try and throw off my conversation. Complex has just texted in and said how to work things out exactly. Yeah, that's the most important job as a school for me personally. It's making sure that I always say we take feral children and make them tiny adults. Obviously, of course, it takes a village. We're not just saying that, parents play their role, family members play their role as well, but that is a huge, most important part of a school, is getting students to learn not just how to interact and socialize, but also how to work with different people. So, for example, even if you have a behavioral policy in the school, my expectations of the student and how I will react will be different to other teachers. And so students are able to learn, oh, okay, well, Mr. Wrigley will, be mad if I do this or X, Y, and Z, but learn how to react and interact with me, which is a hugely important skill when they leave and go to university, but also go into the world of work. People need to be able to know how certain people are going to behave and going to interact. So please don't apologize. Someone just texted in to say sorry for apologizing. Complex has just texted in again to say, yeah, empathy 100%. Absolutely. I like to think that I'm an empathetic teacher. I know I'm a physics teacher that has empathy. I know I think that's an oxymoron. I'm not sure. But yes, this is something that is really, really important and very close to my heart, is students' well-being and being empathetic and kind. Becoming a teacher from the UK, I was just talking to a teacher about this in the UK. Complex has just texted in again saying, just try to put you off again. Don't worry about it. Please text in and try and put me off. I'll try again. But no, I was talking to a teacher today about what's going to happen when we come back in and what are the issues going to be. And the key theme came up of empathy and being empathetic to students' needs. And it just I think it's teaching abroad and teaching Mexican students has made me a more empathetic teacher, because Mexican students, on the whole, this is a generalization, but on the whole, are very empathetic and want to do well and want to please teachers and want to be, so being mad or fake mad, teacher mad at students can really have the opposite effect. So for example, if you take a student outside and say, I'm really disappointed in how you behaved, or something like that, something very generic that you would say to a UK student would probably, well, hopefully would be like, okay, cool, whatever, and learn from it. But saying that I've disappointed you or you've disappointed me to some of my students would absolutely crush them. So I've had to be very careful with the wordings that I've used. Another thing as well is, in terms of like developing empathy as a teacher, is I hate the phrase "don't smile before Christmas." I was told that about a million times when I trained to be a teacher. I trained to be a teacher at the end of 2 decades ago. So in 2008, I started training to be a teacher. And my mentor, who I'm not going to name, obviously, he said, "Don't smile before Christmas." And this was after having a year 7 class that didn't go well. Well, I think it was one of my first classes. And obviously, of course, it doesn't go well. That's part of the job of being a PGCE student, is to make mistakes and things like that. But one of the things he said was, like, you need to be like meaner, essentially. Don't smile before Christmas. And that did stick with me for a while. And I did adopt that as a philosophy for a few months. And then I realized, this sucks. I hate it. I want to be the teacher who smiles. I want to be the teacher that, is empathetic. Doesn't mean I'm a pushover. It doesn't mean that I'm not going to, that I'm not going to tolerate, or that I am going to tolerate poor behavior. I'm still going to have high expectations for my students and enforce it. But I think the whole "don't smile before Christmas" thing has probably put off many, many teachers. And we can see now as well, I think this kind of thing filters in to what we have in recruitment problems in the UK, looking at the latest news and saying that recruitment numbers are down. Well, I'm not surprised if this is the kind of like empathy that we're trying to instill in our teachers. Anyway, we've gone off topic. Please do text in with questions that you have. We're talking about goals, but we're going to go off topic as well, because that's what I do. You should see some of my classes. That's pretty much what we do all the time. But we're talking about personal and professional goals for what do you have for the rest of the year, but also for the following academic year. We're going to pause briefly for a commercial, and you're listening to The Late Late Show with me, Rich Wrigley.
Introducing Amanda Davey. Amanda is one of the first specialist teacher assessors for dyscalculia in the UK and offers dyscalculia tutoring and bespoke training for schools. With 26 years of teaching and tutoring experience in the UK, Amanda offers specialist online tuition focused on building confidence and developing skills. Amanda also offers online and face-to-face training on dyscalculia for educators, informing practitioners as to how to identify children that may have dyscalculia and how to support them in class. Find out more about Amanda and what she can offer you at www.amanda-davy-dyscalculia.co.uk.
So that was our commercial. So just pause for a little commercial break there. We're talking about themes and goals for the rest of the academic year and beyond, either personal or professional, on the Late Late Show with me, Rich Wrigley. Please do text in with any questions. You're here with me for the next 30 minutes or so. And so please do text in with any kind of questions, comments that you have. Complex just texted in again to say, on the subject of empathy, before we pause for the commercial break, what ages do I teach? I would say the ages I teach are, you see, I'm a secondary science teacher, and I've got a range of classes. Normally, I'm, as a physics teacher, and because of timetabling, I'm normally prioritized for Key Stage 4 and Key Stage 5, which is a real pain. But as a head of faculty, I am actually able to be in charge of the timetable as well. So last year, I was able to finally give myself some more Key Stage 3. Key Stage 3 is probably my weakest area as a teacher, because in my many years of teaching as a physics teacher, I think there's a misconception that physics teachers, can't talk to children, and so that we're all nerds, very introverted, and we'll look at our shoes for when we're trying to teach people. So they just give us basically Key Stage 4 and Key Stage 5 and hope that we don't mess up Key Stage 4. I think that's a little bias that probably does filter in, but also because we're not the rarest, but the least common specialty, we're normally prioritized for Key Stage 4 and Key Stage 5 physics at the expense of everything else. It also doesn't help that, for example, I teach the IB diploma program. The complex has just texted in to say I'm in IT, I get the same. Absolutely. And I think I think physics teachers, computing teachers, IT teachers, maybe not maths teachers. I'm going to get some angry emails from maths teachers here, but maybe some angry messages. But we are probably hyper empathetic, but just don't display it in the same way as other teachers, I would say, personally. And so going back to prioritize, I also teach theory of knowledge last week. Oh, if you want to listen into last week's show, please do download it on the Podbean app. I was talking to David Fairweather, who is a TOK theory of knowledge coordinator at his school. I've also teach theory of knowledge and have coordinated it myself as well. It's essentially a philosophy course that's not philosophy. It's the best way I can describe it. How do we know what we know is the best way that we can describe it. Epistemology, which I can't say properly because I'm like Ricky from Trailer Park Boys and can't use big school words. Anyway, so I'm prioritized for theory of knowledge, for physics and so forth. So Key Stage 3 is very, very tricky. And it was an absolute nightmare, even as the head of faculty, trying to timetable myself in some Key Stage 3. But I teach all age groups. I particularly love teaching sixth form because I can be quite a sarcastic person and I like very complicated physics problems. So I like being able to be creative with teaching complicated physics problems to students, developing fun and cool practicals that they can do, and then also get them to learn physics. I like teaching Key Stage 4 and Key Stage 3 as well. And I found recently that I've really, really enjoyed teaching Key Stage 3 year groups because it's a totally different challenge and the attitudes of the students are totally different. Sorry, I'm just, so yeah, the what was I saying? The stakes are very different, but also the attitudes of the students are very different as well. In year 7 and year 8 particularly, they can still, generally speaking, they can be way more enthusiastic for science, and they can be way more enthusiastic for science than maybe in years 9 and 10. Of course, this is a hasty generalization as well because of this, but I find that teaching that can be really, really fun. And one of the things I've really missed this year with my year 7 group, for example, is teaching them over Zoom. Is they're very lovely and they're very, very good bunch of students, but it's just not the same as teaching them during a practical because we have to go through so much abstract concepts that we couldn't normally do. So for me, being able to get back in school in a couple of weeks and teach year 7, even just simple things like safety of a Bunsen burner, which is something I would normally hate doing. It's something that I would normally do on a transition week for students coming up from year 6 into year 7, and we would get them to get their Bunsen burner operator certificate and things like that. And it's just basically how to light a Bunsen burner without setting their hair on fire, which apparently is trickier than you would imagine for most students. That's something that would normally really bore me. That sounds really bad, but something that is not the most exciting lesson, I think, but it's something that's very, very important. I'm so looking forward to being able to do that, being able to do a Bunsen burner safety test with some of the students. That's going to be so exciting. I think going back to empathy as well, this is something that's super, my approach to different year groups is very, very different. So I think especially for Key Stage 5, it's something that's really, really important. I think we need to understand how overworked students can be. I also teaching the IB diploma, we have to be very, very aware. For those of you who don't know, that the IB diploma is essentially students will have to do 6 subjects. They have to do their native language, so English language, English literature, or whatever, something along those lines. They also then have to do a second language. They have to do maths of some kind, a humanities of some kind, a science of some kind, and then an additional subject that they would pick, either an art or another humanities or another science. And then on top of that, they have to do a lot of things like creativity, action, and service. It's called CAS, and it's essentially all of the aspects of the Duke of Edinburgh Award. You have to do a certain amount of creative, something, a hobby that's creative, a hobby that involves, running around and action and some volunteer work. They also have to do theory of knowledge, which I also teach, but they also have to do extended essay as well, which is where they have to write a 4,000-word essay on an area that interests them. They have to come up with a research question and do it. It's a little bit like the extended project, which I don't know if still exists for A-level or not. It was just coming out when I was training to be a teacher in the UK. And I used to have a couple of extended project people for in my students in the UK. This is something as well that I think a lot of teachers forget, because especially UK teachers going to teach, or maybe I should say English teachers, because in Scotland they have hires and different things like that. But I would say English and Welsh teachers, we're used to the idea of A levels, and that students will do 3 to 4 A levels or something along those lines, or the equivalent, and that maybe they will do. Maybe they'll do extended project. Maybe they'll have a few other things on their plate, like Duke of Edinburgh Award, part-time jobs, all of those kind of things. But that they can devote more time to our subjects because they're only doing 3 or 4 core subjects. Well, IB students are doing 6 core subjects that they have to pass all of to get the diploma, plus 3 other sort of things like CAS, extended essay, and theory of knowledge on top of that. And so the workload is absolutely ridiculous. And around February of year 13, we get to the stage where I call it year 13 are just done with it. And they're basically just over everything. You could have the most enthusiastic student who is on top of all their assignments, but all the coursework is piled up, or not, we even make sure we stagger the deadlines for coursework, but all the coursework's starting to get in, exams are just looming. And I remember being stressed at that time with 3 A levels. I don't know how I would manage a 17-year-old me going, okay, cool, I've got my physics exams, my maths exams, but I've also got English literature exams. I think I would absolutely burn out. And so I don't know how students I don't know how students would be able to sort of cope with that. So Complex had just texted in and said, I think IB is good, really good. Thank God for the Lisbon Declaration. Was that where it was developed? I didn't realize it was developed, created at the Lisbon Declaration. Roger's just texted in to say, Lisbon, the dream. I'd love to teach in Lisbon. I think that would be a really good place to work in, and the lifestyle would be really, really good. I did apply for a job at a school, I think it was in Lisbon, or it was just on the outskirts of Lisbon many years ago. I didn't get the job, so I didn't really pay much attention to it, but I was very, very excited about it as well, because I was moving from Brazil to Portugal. So I was like, oh, cool, I can still speak Portuguese more or less. So yeah, I didn't realize that where the IB was formed. So we're going to wrap up the show in about 20 minutes or so. We're talking about themes and goals, or sorry, I should say in about 25 minutes or so. We're talking about themes and goals for the overall year. And just to provide a little bit of context, my school is going to be returning to presential lessons for the first time in 14 months. So my goals are going to be very much centered for the short term until the end of the academic year, and just making sure students are happy and feeling safe in school. Beyond that, then we're going to look as a site. Personally, or professionally, I'm going to be looking at developing my faculty and the resources available to my faculty, as well as growing the department, growing the faculty in those areas as well. And the other goal as well is going to be, how can we make sure that we've caught up a lot of the students, particularly the exam students. Although they shouldn't be the overall priority, we can never escape that the exam subjects, the exam year groups are the ones that always get prioritized over other things. So Complex, just going back to the Lisbon Declaration, Complex has just texted in to say it's the one declaring that access qualifications are equivalent across Europe. Not sure how that will last post Brexit. Interesting way of writing Brexit there. I'm trying to stay apolitical here. That was definitely not the correct spelling of Brexit, which I can't say out online. I didn't realize that yet. So, I mean, like, we also have a similar problem here as well in terms of qualification overlap, because finally Mexican universities have started to recognize that the IB diploma is a thing. Because before they would basically have their own grading system. So we finally managed to explain to sort of like the national university here, it's like, hey, this is equivalent to this, this, and this. Because in the past, what I would have to do is teach the IB diploma and the Mexican curriculum at the same time, mashed together, and it was an absolute nightmare trying to get that to work. So yeah, we're talking about short-term and long-term goals. The short-term goals for us has got to be just making sure everyone's happy and healthy, and then the long-term goals are getting in. The long-term goals or the middle-term goals are going to be getting students caught up on the work they've missed. Now, sadly, that does mean that exam groups, probably pragmatically speaking, will be prioritized as well. And luckily for us, the IB is actually, I've got some critical things to say about the IB, and I'm amazed at how watching the IB trying to make decisions is kind of funny, because it's kind of like, it's like watching an oil tanker trying to turn. It just happens so slowly. And I think it's the same for all exam boards. My other exam boards are Cambridge International Exams, and I don't think either exam boards have covered themselves in glory. And listening to people dealing with tags and things like that in the UK, I don't think any exam board has covered themselves in glory. One thing teachers need to have a discussion about is how are we, why are they not under the same scrutiny that we are by governments? Because I think hearing some of the stories about the UK exam boards and hearing some of the stories about other exam boards as well, I don't think that would be tolerated in a lot of other businesses, which is essentially what exam boards are. Anyway, so luckily, in terms of catching students up, the IB have actually been very good in terms of removing core components to give teachers more time to catch things up. So they've actually removed components of the syllabus, like the optional aspects of the syllabus, that won't be examined on this time next year. So come next May, next June, it will be removed a little bit, just to make sure everyone has the same opportunities, particularly because the IB is aware that it's not just Mexico, but a lot of Latin America, a lot of the US, other countries have been locked down fully, so they've not been able to do a lot of the practical based work. And it also means no matter how good you are as a teacher, no matter how good the students are, learning online is just not the same as learning face to face. And I think one of the things that this has shown us, or this whole situation has shown us, is that learning online, no matter how much technology you put in place, it cannot replace being in a classroom with students. I know that sounds a bit hippie and a bit wishy-washy, but I think one of the things that this has taught us is, you can't just expect technology to revolutionize education. So Complex just texted in again to say exam boards are struggling big time since COVID. Businesses too. Schools doing better, I think. I think so. I mean, I don't think anyone has handled it perfectly, and nor should we expect perfection for everyone. Maybe some people in the government could have handled it a little bit better. I'll try and stay out of that, but I don't think anyone can expect perfection. And one of the things I always say to myself, or someone said to me right at the start of this, is I think, like most teachers, I set very high expectations for myself and beat myself up about it when I don't meet those high expectations. And so one of the things that someone said to me at the start of this was, your 100% now needs to be 80%, and you need to be happy with 80%, because if you give 100%, you're just going to burn out. And I think in terms of looking towards the future, I think, right, okay, I need to up my goals a little bit now. This was a struggle, kind of like going, right, okay, that's enough, which I think is the hardest thing that everyone has to do. I think now we need to transition back to, right, okay, what can we, how can we do more, but still make sure that we're not burning out? So Complex just texted in to say, does his name begin with B? I couldn't possibly comment on the politicians that I think have done an abysmal job handling this, nor should I. I think his name starts with a G, second name starts with a W. I don't know. I mean, like, bearing in mind the previous government was one of the reasons why I left the UK. I think I'm a biased perspective on it, so I'll stay clear of that. Speaking of which, let's hear from one of those politicians right now as we pause momentarily for the news.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News with Megan Goods.
This is your latest Teachers Talk Radio News. Recruitment levels for trainee teachers were missed for the sixth year running in the 2019 to 20 academic year. Following the last year, however, they are expected to increase, with the Welsh Government believing the pandemic has highlighted the importance of the profession. A government spokesman said, "Current trends suggest the pandemic has helped to highlight the vital role played by teachers, and more people are choosing to start teacher training." Senior Policy Officer for the NEU, Mary van den Hovel, also said she believes lockdown has helped the image of the profession, but that it was too early to know the exact impact. In 2019 in Wales, only 465 secondary trainees enlisted of an allocated 1,006 spaces. The Labour Party has called the government's £1.4 billion catch-up plan inadequate. The Shadow Education Secretary, Kate Green, said she was shocked at how little the plan contained, describing it as a betrayal of our young people, and stated that Kevin Collins's resignation makes it clear that the government's education recovery plan is totally insufficient to help every child bounce back from the impacts of the pandemic. The Labour Party is seeking a U-turn on the policy, testing government backbenchers with an opposition day debate this Wednesday in the House of Commons. Gavin Williamson has urged families to ensure they complete COVID tests before returning to school following the May half-term holiday. More than 50 million lateral flow tests have been taken by students across England since January. Williamson said he was hugely grateful to the families, students, and all those working in education for their role in making it happen. Despite the continued testing regimes, concern is still mounting in schools surrounding the Delta variant, which is thought to have a 40% higher transmission rates than other COVID variants. That was your daily education news briefing.
So welcome back. You're listening to the Late Late Show with me, Rich Wrigley. Got another 15 minutes or so for you here on the Late Late Show. Please do text in with any questions, any comments that you have for this theme this week that we're looking at. We're looking at the goals that we have for the academic year. Are you just looking to sort of get to the end of the year and have done with it? Have you got any open goals, any open, sort of long-term goals that we have for development, either professionally or personally? And Roger's just texted in to say survive and say goodbye. Absolutely, as well. It's going to be very emotional for me just to survive, to be honest. Yeah, surviving to the end of the year is definitely going to be one, especially with reopening. But it's also going to be very emotional. Our year 13 students have already left school, and I've taught them theory of knowledge and physics, a good majority of them, when they started the IB diploma program. So basically when they started A levels, they were new to they started A levels when I started working there. And so for the 2 years I've worked here, I've spent the majority of my time teaching them online, but I did get to know them pretty well before seeing them, basically before not seeing them, before going into lockdown. So it's going to be a very emotional time to say goodbye to them. They've already essentially graduated. We're going to have a very small graduation ceremony inside of the school this coming week, and I'm very looking forward to seeing all my students and actually being able to say goodbye to them properly, because we had like a sort of a goodbye party over sort of several Zoom chats that were organized by the school and things like that. And it just wasn't the same. And also, I'm someone who's really, really bad at saying goodbyes. So I hate saying goodbye. So I was kind of like, yep, this isn't goodbye. I'll see you soon, kind of thing. So it's something that I really want to make sure that I'm able to wish them well and send them off, basically, because it's been I think that generation has probably suffered the most. There was something the previous year while we were online said that they were the generation of the earthquake and the pandemic, because we had a very serious earthquake here about 4 years ago now. But this generation that's graduating, I would say, is really the generation of the pandemic and the earthquake, because they've lived through it. They were in year 9, or year 10 going into year 10 going into year 9. No, sorry, year 10 when the earthquake hit. So they just started their Key Stage 4 IGCSEs when the earthquake hit, and then they basically spent pretty much all of their sixth form online as well. So it's been a real struggle for them. So yeah, one of my goals is to be able to say goodbye to them, as well as members of staff that are leaving and things like that. But I don't know about you, but I'm one of those people that doesn't actually enjoy talking to my colleagues as much as enjoys talking to the students. So I think I'm going to miss the students a lot more than some of my colleagues. That's not a read on my colleagues. My colleagues are wonderful. It's just that I'm a nerdy physicist who doesn't really like talking to people. So you're joining me for the last 14 or so minutes of the Late Late Show with me, Rich Wrigley. I'd love to hear from you. What are your goals from this year other than surviving? Has your school implemented any kind of target setting for this year as well? What has the policy been on sort of professional development and target setting during the year of COVID? Our school's been very fortunate in that respect, that we've kind of basically, at the start of the year, I had a discussion with my senior management, and basically everyone said, look, that, you know, we're not going to worry about target setting and goals and recording it and using it to monitor performance this year because it's just too much. Let's just make sure that we're all teaching the best we possibly can be and support each other. I'm imagining that's not going to be the case anymore. We're obviously, you know, I think it is good that we have, you know, performance plans in place to make sure everyone, you know, to set a goal. But I think it's yeah, that's something that's going to be slowly brought back in. Complex just texted in again to say, are there any issues re-recognition of Mexican qualifications in the UK? Yes, I don't know, to be honest. I don't know. I think they're easily translated. I know English qualifications are recognized here, but it's weird how you would how you translate them over, because everything is graded on a scale from 10 to 0, sort of. And I say sort of because this is the same in elementary school, or primary school, I should say, all the way up to university. A 5 is a fail, so there's still other fails beyond that. A 6 is a fail as well, but sort of a pass. I suppose like an E at A level, it's an A level, but it's not a pass really, or a D at A level. Then a 6, then a C grade is like a 7 number, and then it goes like 8, 9, 10. But you can also have decimals. There's 2 significant figures for the grading system in Mexico. You can have like 9.2 or something like that. It is ridiculously confusing. It is absolutely bonkers. I suppose the best way you could say it is it's like on a percentage out of 100, and you just divide it down, so it's a single number to 9.2 or whatever. But it's also the same for university. So you would have university grades ranging from a 10. So I suppose a first, an English first or a British first or UK first would be a 10, but no one's quite sure. So when I handed over my degree certificate to people, they were like, "Oh, what grade is this?" And I handed over my PGCE to the staff in a school here. They were like, "Well, what grade is this?" And I was like, "Oh, it's a PGCE. It's my teaching qualification. It's pass fail. It's a pass." So they were like, "Oh, so it's a 7." I was like, "Well, probably not, because that sounds really bad by the minutiae of understanding it." But it's yeah. So I know that British qualifications translate over here, because also I've looked at doing a master's in physics at the one of the universities here, and they said, yeah, it will translate over, no problem. Qualifications going from Mexico to the UK, I'm not 100% sure. I think it does work. I know there are programs. The British Embassy runs a lot of scholarship programs. Chevening, I think they're called Chevening scholarships. So there are definitely scholarship opportunities for students in Mexico to go and visit the UK and to study, to kind of do like how Erasmus was before Brexit, similar kind of thing, like do essentially an Erasmus year, but be a Mexican student going to the UK. And I think there is some reciprocity with that. You can tell I can't do big words very well, but yeah, there's some kind of similar program for UK students going to Mexico. I'm not 100% sure, but the problem as well with with UK students is you would need to be able to speak Spanish to do any degree here. I think there are some degree courses in English, but there are essentially 0. So I think that would probably limit a lot of scholarship opportunities and things, unless probably the students are doing a degree in Spanish, or Latin American history or something along those lines, or Latin American politics or whatever. I think those are the only options where it kind of limits it down. But going back to it, we're talking about goals and how we're going to kind of look towards the future after COVID. I'd love to hear from you as well. What kind of goals have you set yourself for the final push of this year? Is it just survive and say goodbye, or are you going to be trying to be a bit ambitious as well and set other targets as well? Personally, for me, it is just survive. I just want to get through this year. I am looking towards the future as well, but also I'm thinking in terms of a middle leader, and I'm thinking, right, okay, well, this is what my faculty is going to need in the next year or so. This is what we're going to need in 3 years' time, and also being aware of situations like, financial situations and all of those kind of things as well. So I'm kind of thinking long term, but not personally. It's more for, or professionally, me personally speaking, but for uh, my faculty and developing my faculty as well. So, but then also we've got like personally speaking though, my goals are just to survive for the rest of this year, basically, just to try and get through it for the rest of the year. Personally, I had so much planned when I moved back to Mexico, and me and my wife's Mexican, me and my wife said we moved back to Mexico from teaching in Europe in 2019, and then basically COVID hit. So we basically had 6 months of being able to travel around Mexico. So personally, my goals are to see Mexico again, kind of similar to a Bill Bryson Notes from a Small Island kind of aspect. I very much feel that Mexico is my adopted home, and I really feel like I could be my long-term goal is to get Mexican citizenship, similar to how Bill Bryson got UK citizenship. Incidentally, Bill Bryson did got his citizenship in my hometown of Eastleigh. And if you've read his second Notes from a Small Island book, he said one of the questions for the citizenship test of the UK should be, you've seen Eastleigh, are you sure you still want to be a UK citizen? But yeah, that's one of my long-term goals. And one of my short-term goals for this is to visit this country and experience it a little bit more. The last time I left Mexico City to visit somewhere was a place called Oaxaca. Sounds similar to the Mexican restaurants in the UK. That's where that name comes from, but it's spelled Oaxaca because it's a Nahuatl language. It's a Mexica language. It basically comes from, I think, ancient Aztec. That was about a year and a half ago, just before we went into lockdown. And so one of my goals is to be able to see this country a lot more, visit it, and take in the culture and of my adopted home. So yeah, so that's basically one of the one of my personal goals. Speaking of that as well, we have huge there's a huge trail running community here and racing community. So one of the things, personal goals I've already said, is to to complete a couple of trail races, as well as to run a half marathon when half marathons open up here in Mexico City. You'd be running if you run a half marathon in Mexico City, I've done it twice, and it's super, super hard because you're running at 2,500 meters above sea level. So it is an added layer of difficulty. But one of my goals for this year is to try and run a marathon at this altitude, to try and get a personal best of running a half marathon at this altitude, and then also to get a personal best in a half marathon. So one of my sneaky goals is I've been training, basically running up and down the hill that I live by, very sort of like building up my stamina, is that the word? Building up my strength and all of those kind of things. And then I'm going to register for a race that's at sea level in one of the cities by sea level, and just basically get there the day before. And so I will be experienced running pretty routinely not at sea level, at altitude, and then try and get a personal best by kind of doing like what the top marathon athletes do, by running a race at sea level as well. Right, folks. So, folks, I'm afraid that's it. We are approaching the end of our time for the Late Late Show with me, Rich Wrigley. I hope you've enjoyed listening to me waffle on this evening about setting goals. Please join me next week. It's been wonderful to chat to all of you. Please join me next week, where we'll be discussing another educational topic on Teachers Talk Radio on the Late Late Show with me, Rich Wrigley.